Well, hello. Thank you for joining our 2022 Innovate Ag webinar series. I'm Steve Mantle with Innovate Ag, and it's really a pleasure to have you here. We seem to have folk from all over the globe this time. So to some of you, good evening, some of you, good morning, and some of you, good afternoon. Today, we're going to focus on unlocking actionable soil data. And we'll take a look at the agenda here on the next slide. We will be joined by Jared Carlson, who is going to share a grower's perspective on utilizing SoilOptix data and yield mapping data to have a kind of a new lens looking through blocks that he's responsible for. We'll have a soil scientist, Wade Carter, join from Northwest Ag. They are a lab based here in the Pacific Northwest in Kennewick, I believe it is, that we work closely with as a partner that does a lot of processing for growers that we work with. And then Zach Harmer with SoilOptix based out of Ontario, Canada, will join, and he's going to speak a little bit about the SoilOptix capabilities, how it works, what that black box is that it does. And then myself and Caleb Penn, our data scientist, will close with a little demo showing different layers of soil and sensor data in Android and iOS app. And we'll get into some use cases that start to kind of bring all of this together. And then we'll open up for Q&A. So should be a lot of fun. There is a Q&A box where you can submit questions to queue things up for us at the end. We'll do some live responses based on that, both written and interactive in the end, and we can run a little bit over. So that's that backdrop. Ian is our marketing lead, and I believe he has us set up for a poll. Is that right, Ian?
Yes, let me pull in. There we go. Let me know if you guys are seeing this on your screen now.
Yeah, so where are you located is a good starting point. So if you just take a minute to select that, and looks like we so far effectively have folks coming in from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, got Canada representing, and a few others. So we'll find out where the other is maybe toward the end when we'll turn around the Q&A. So good mix there. Growers wise, it looks like so far about a third of you are growers. We've got about 25 or so folk on the call thus far. That's shifting as we're going through on this. And then the question is do you plan on utilizing variable rate application in the near future? The answer, interestingly, is 42% of you have said that you are planning on utilizing variable rate application in the near future, and 56% are interested in learning more, and only one person said no. And maybe that's because they're not a grower. So that's great. We'll go ahead and close that poll, but that's really interesting information, and thanks for sharing that out. In fact, I think I can share that on the screen here, maybe. Is that what's popping up? Yeah, so let's move on and hand it to Jared Carlson. Again, what's going on, Connor? If we want to move to the next screen. Jared, thanks again for joining, and we'll hand it to you to share a little bit of a grower's perspective on this data and how it's useful for you.
No problem. I'm glad to be here. I've found this to be quite intriguing, and hopefully one day make us better farmers. Worked with Scone & Connors in my previous career when I was a field rep. I've been working with these farms for quite a few years, at least 15, and now on site. And what I was trying to, I read about Steve's Innovate program, and I wanted to look into his scanning, not only SoilOptix, but Green Atlas. And here we are. And what I'm trying to do is figure out a way to grow consistent cropping of high quality fruit year in and year out, with marginal soils. We grow, all of our apples are grown in the Royal City area. It's a wonderful growing region, as many of the people on realize, but we have some pretty marginal soils, a lot of sand. Over half of the orchards we farm are not on Bureau water, they're on well water. So we deal with a lot of bicarbonates, salts, and things like that. Our goal every day is to grow the best quality fruit possible, not only for the farm, but for the warehouse, the marketing company, and ultimately the consumer. So with that, we scanned approximately, it was a little over 100 acres, I believe, Steve, you'd have to look, various different blocks, varieties, rootstocks, and I found one that was really intriguing and I wanted to share it with you guys today. And so I'd love to move forward with that. Ian, if you wouldn't mind. This is about a 20-acre block of honeycrisp, originally planted in 2001, 2002. This is a 26 rootstock, grafted over to honeycrisp in 2016, I believe, or 17. Again, this is well water ground, so I'm dealing with issues. The soil data I found, again, extremely interesting. Like any other honeycrisp grower, we don't have enough calcium, we have too much potassium. But sharing this chart with you, I want, just go ahead and go to the map. Okay, so on the right-hand side of your screen, guys, you'll see the redder area. There's a notch cut out on the very top of the block. That's a loading area. From that loading area there to the east, which would be to the right, is hands down some of the best fruit we grow. Colors very well. It was some of the first fruit picked in the block. And it's that way consistently every year. Now, I have a map and I'm starting to put things together and figuring out, hopefully figuring out what is giving us that benefit. And this is our cation exchange here. If you notice, it's a little bit higher. Obviously, our mean is 6.7, where our low 6.4, our high 7. If you wouldn't mind going down to organic matter, Ian. Okay. So I took this and I'm like, well, organic matter's levels higher on that side. I then started looking at our other blocks and I noticed where I had higher organic matter levels. That incidentally is usually where our better fruit is. So with the cost of nitrogen the way it is, cost of fertility alone going up, how do I grow quality fruit and not break the bank on fertility applications, and also not put the orchard into a vegetative state? I need that perfect balance. Everything you guys see on the right-hand side of this map has a lot more consistent return bloom, better color, good average size, good quality. It's just kind of like the go-to every year. When we get close to harvest, this is where you pull up and park. So with that, I've started to, the pH is a little higher, but it's not, I mean, we're talking, my low is 7.4, my high is 7.5. So it's pretty well balanced. The map makes it look extremely high and extremely low. I find that honeycrisp need a little bit higher pH. It seems that my quality is better in those higher pHs. So I'm 7.2, 7.3 range is perfect. I don't really want to go above 7.5. Go ahead and go to the next screen. Calcium numbers higher. Go to the next screen. NH4, NO3 is lower. This block is all irrigated the same. So it's all irrigated at the same time. It's basically one valve lights the whole thing up. All of the fertility was applied, blanket application. Where my organic matter level is higher, I'm able to use nitrogen effectively, and it seems to have better usage. So as I move forward, I'm looking at my soils and I'm looking at how do I increase organic. We aren't just an apple operation at Stone and Connors. We grow a lot of potatoes, a lot of onions for fresh market. And the end goal is to be able to use SoilOptix type technology to help us map circles that are going to be planted in the future to try to amend some of the soils ahead of time to get optimum production of both spuds and onions. This is apple, this is permanent crop. I am a big fan of carbon, and I know that today we're going to talk a little bit about carbon mapping, but I'm definitely interested. Moving forward, I'm not sure what this is going to look like, but any new fields we will be doing this on, or replanting, or some blocks that we didn't do last year that we might be doing this year. I really find this to be extremely helpful. As far as variable rate technology, we know it's there. There's a lot of, it's been around for 25 years, 20 to 25 years. I don't think we're doing enough of it. But again, my biggest point of this is I need to increase my organic matter. I can't fix sand, I can't fix silt, I can't move dirt. But if I can increase my organic matter, I think I can make the orchard just naturally better. Not too much, but just naturally better. Anyway, that's kind of my snapshot of it. If you have any questions, feel free.
That's great. Awesome. So we'll save for Q&A at the end, but if you do have any questions, for those in the audience, please do type something there in the Q&A section, and Jared will be here at the end to answer questions. Great combo. Thank you. Let's switch up to Wade. Wade, thanks very much for joining out of Tri-Cities, Kennewick.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Like this slide says, I've been working in various agricultural and environmental labs for over a dozen years, and for the past 7 years, I've been the lab director at Northwest Ag. We're a NAPT, PAP accredited laboratory. We do soil, plant, and water testing, mainly for agricultural needs. And this place has been around for 35, almost 40 years. So just to give you a brief overview, every year we analyze tens of thousands of soil and plant samples for just about all the nutrients that Jared just mentioned. On average, our lab staff is extremely experienced. They have 10 years of analytical laboratory experience per person. They are all experts at just about every station that they operate. And our lab analyzes 60 blind proficiency and accreditation samples every year to make sure that our results are accurate and we maintain a high level of performance. To expand a little bit on the accreditation, our lab is NAPT, PAP accredited. And for the past 4 years, our soil lab has maintained an average score of 99 out of 100, something we're thrilled about. And a quick note about accreditation is, some people don't know this, agricultural labs are not required to be accredited or even to participate in proficiency testing. It's important to make sure that the lab you use is NAPT, PAP accredited, not just a participant or in either the NAPT program or an ALP program, although that's better than not participating at all. The PAP accreditation makes it so that the lab is accountable for their results. There are some samples and programs that they can't participate in if they don't have that PAP accreditation, and simply it's kind of the bare minimum a laboratory can do to kind of earn the honor to do the testing for you. So even if you don't use us, whatever lab you do use, I would double check to make sure that they are PAP accredited. And then finally, there are labs all over the country, all over the world. Most of the growers, it looked like, were in Washington and Idaho on that poll at the beginning of this webinar. So why use a lab in Washington? Why use Northwest Ag as opposed to sending your samples to Ohio? Well, first, it's fast. We have a 1-day turnaround time on results, faster than Amazon Prime. So also it's convenient. You know, you can have our courier take your samples and bring them to our lab. So if we receive your samples on Tuesday, you're going to get your results on a Wednesday. And finally, we're accurate, and we specialize in the methods that are used in the Northwest. All of you are, I'm sure, familiar with fertility guidelines and the publications put out by Oregon State, University of Idaho, and Washington State University for all these crops: apples, tree fruits, vineyards, potatoes. And every single one of those guides has criteria saying, if these are your results based on this analyte, then you should be applying this much phosphorus, this much potassium, or nitrogen. And depending on where you are in the country, the methods used and consequently the results fluctuate. But the methods that you get from our lab and on our results are the exact same methods that you get when comparing them to those fertility guideline publications, which is important because those methods are used and approved by oversight committees like the Soil Science Society of America and the NAPT program as being beneficial methods for the region.
Awesome. Thank you, Wade. Yeah, and just an endorsement on the Northwest Ag piece. We work across different lab partners, but we really double down with Wade and his team, and it's convenience, just like you said, it's consistent in terms of getting that turnaround time right away. And the fascinating thing, to me, was that blind testing piece and the rigor that they have to go through, where all the labs that are in this across the country get shipped the same bucket of soil effectively to go do that testing, and remarkably come in with this really tight, consistent set of feedback. And so that for me was a huge takeaway, to see that consistency and the predictability and the reliability in the sample analysis is really key, because it's a baseline of what we use for the SoilOptix piece, which really derives this more granular map, which tees us up to Zach Harmer from SoilOptix, live from Ontario. So Zach, welcome to the call. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Steve. I think, yeah, there we go. No, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to, obviously speak to a number of folks in your area here, and what seems to be a fairly global call to some degree. So certainly welcome everyone here today. The agenda today actually set this up nicely, I would say, in terms of, what we're going to kind of talk about for the next 10, 15 minutes, depends on how we go through these next few slides. So as Steve mentioned, my name is Zach Harmer. I am my official title is North American Sales and Global Support Manager. I've had the absolute privilege to be working with this technology it'll be coming up 7 years here. Very shortly after a summer student role here in 2015, and then coming back as a full-time employee in 17. So a little bit about SoilOptix. Feel free to go to the next slide, Ian, if you'd like. But we are a company with a fairly long history in terms of ag technologies, to a degree, with how new and with how new everything is. Every year, it seems there's a new technology coming on the marketplace. As Steve mentioned, we're based here in Ontario, Canada, so a nice 3 hours ahead of most folks here on the call. So in our nice little evening here already. But in terms of sort of gamma radiation, and that's the baseline really to the SoilOptix technology, and I'm going to dive into some of that a little bit in the next few slides. But really, the research itself in terms of agriculture really started in the early 2000s. But gamma radiation itself as a technology has been around for 30, 40, 50 years outside of ag. So the backbone of this technology really is surrounding physical properties, texture, organic matter. And so it was, once this research began in 2003, there was an indication that, hey, we can use this sort of technology, or these researchers can use this technology within this industry and provide better soil data to really growers wherever that you could place these sensors. So about 2009, that's when sort of our company here, formerly Practical Precision, sort of started. And it was 2010 that we were actually introduced to this technology that actually stemmed from the Netherlands. So it was at that point that we sort of began our own research around this technology. 2013 is when we actually started to offer this as a commercial service to growers here in Ontario. And that's where we really started to ramp up sort of the understanding of how can we deliver this information to growers? What can they gain out of it? What's the ROI? And that's sort of when we began sort of our journey in 2017 as a standalone company of what SoilOptix is today. And in 2022, as we start off this wonderful new year, SoilOptix at this point operates roughly in about 14 different countries, operating roughly about 70 sensors worldwide, and essentially in a variety of different crops. And I'll kind of get into a bunch of that here shortly. So, we're an exciting team, roughly about 15 to 16 people on staff here, filled with programmers, GIS analysts, sales support, and admins. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of our story, if you will. So feel free to go on there, Ian. So SoilOptix itself really is a four-step process, really, in the end, and to break it down to the simplest. So the first big piece is, of course, the sensor, right? So collecting of this radiation data. And so we're mounting, as you've maybe seen some pictures or whatnot, mounting this sensor, which is roughly about 2 feet wide. We mount it on the front or back of any sort of vehicle. With Innovate Ag, it's mounted on the back, I think, of their Gator, or side by side with their Green Atlas as well. So it's mounted roughly about 2 feet off the ground. And in broadacre crops versus specialty crops, of course, or permanent cropping systems, the application or sort of the SOP for field operation can be slightly different. But in the end, what we're doing is we're collecting essentially the signature that's naturally emitted from the soil. Okay, doesn't matter in what crop we're working in or what sort of soil we're working in, this emission of radiation is always coming into the sensor. And this is what allows us to sort of essentially build these various models that we do output from a soil data perspective. So the sensor component is obviously very, very important. It's what tells us sort of the soil variability, if you will, across the field. But the second step is probably just as important, if not more important to some degree, and that's the soil sampling part. So this is kind of bringing in what Wade was discussing with respect to, accurate soil sampling. You want an accredited lab. You want to be confident. That's what I always say to any of my providers or prospects is you want to be confident in that lab that you're using, right? We're not here to say, hey, use this lab or anything like that. As long as it's a lab that fits to the crops that you're working in, the geography that you're working in, we'll work with that lab. So we're really looking at the top 6 to 8 inches really with this technology. So again, that sort of matches well to, most crops and most management that exists within the ag industry. And then really all that information that we gather is coming into our data processing center here based in Ontario. And within that, we're producing essentially all these different properties. So Jared did a great job of sort of illustrating a couple that are really important to him, which actually I would say is fairly important across the whole sphere, it seems, with respect to, growers and agronomists: calcium, mag, K, phosphorus, textures, pH, organic matter, and of course, getting into some other complex models, which I'll touch on in a second. Go ahead there, Ian. So this is sort of the first two steps, and this is what we're seeing in the field. And I kind of wanted to touch on, ultimately, what is the sensor telling us, right? And this is just a map from Western Canada. And I see one of the participants here today is actually the gentleman that made this map. So welcome. But where this sensor sort of, as I mentioned, shows the variability within the soil itself, and focusing sort of on these specific samples here that I've circled 1, 2, 3, and 5. The sampling that we do is roughly about a 1 per 8 acre, 1 per 3 hectare basis, with a minimum 4 samples per field, depending on on the smaller fields, let's say, or up to 30 acres. So that's why this field has about 16 samples. It's a little bit of a larger field, of course, but what we're trying to do is capture the variability that the sensor picks up with these samples. So being strategic on that sampling location, and the program helps identify that. You can go ahead there, Ian. So when you look across sort of this field itself, it's a great indication of some of the variability that we pick up with the sensor, and ultimately what's actually happening within the environment itself, right, in the soil itself. So you look at sort of 0.1, sort of in this yellow phase, which I would deem as sort of the middle of the spectrum, right? Little bit darker, not too much, but a little bit of organic matter and some crop stand there, as you can see. As you get into your lighter blue, so lower radiation is going to be areas that are more granular. Let's say they're going to be less organic matter, and you can see that sort of in this picture here on 0.2. 0.3 is in a red area. Most of the time, these red areas are going to be higher OM, heavier textured soils, so basically your clay percentage is increasing. And you can see that again in the picture here with respect to, again, the soil is a little bit darker, definitely higher organic matter and a much better stand in the crop itself. And of course, you can get into dark blue, so really, really low radiation, really granular soils. And essentially you can see that as well within the stand. So you can go to the next slide there, Ian. But one of the kind of the neat and really more important pieces of this technology is its repeatability, right? So you want to be confident when you go out with that technology, or when you go out with that sensor, that the data that you collect that day can be utilized for upwards of 6, 8, 10 years, depending on sort of the management of that field. And this is sort of one of the studies that we had done overseas in the UK, and looking at essentially how does radiation, right? How does soil radiation change over a given time frame? And it doesn't, right? So this gives us the ability to utilize the sensor collecting, or the sensor data that's been collected in 2018 maybe, or on Jared's block there as well. But still soil sample every year, 2 times a year, 3 times a year, every 3 years, and utilize that original survey data to essentially build these models again, of these fertility models. So what that can do, and I think I saw a slide that I think Steve and Caleb probably will get into some of that time series of how does that soil change throughout a given season. But that's what we can do with this technology, is utilize that original survey data, but apply new fertility layers or new fertility information and redevelop those models. So now we can get a high resolution picture of how that soil is changing over a given season, and manage that based on, the crop that you're working within. So, and that's sort of, what's the applicability of the technology, right? It's nice, it's pretty, it's a tube, it looks good on the front of a vehicle, but what does it really do? So in terms of SoilOptix, as I mentioned, we operate in a number of countries, which sort of gives us a unique perspective on, the different crops that we work in, from, let's say, orchards in Chile to orchards across, the West Coast, to actually orchards that we do in the UK, right? And then of course, broadacre crops across the globe as well. So, that's sort of illustrating in the little icon to the right is the type of crops that we work in. Soil is everywhere, obviously. So that means that there is a management that has to exist. Doesn't matter what sort of crop that you work in, right? And that's what we're trying to do with this technology, is sort of unlocking this potential, right? looking at where these, what we would classify pockets of opportunity to really drive various other pieces of management in those fields, right? Being more selective, being more smart on what we're doing in these fields. And I think what Jared was sharing earlier really illustrates that nicely. I don't think I could have chose a better example, right? He knows where his crop best performs, right? And he can see that within the soil data. And now he can be a little bit more strategic on how does he go back out to that field and manage that next year and the year following, right? So you can go on to the next slide, Ian, if you like. So one of the nice thing, or one of the things that we always, work with this technology on is variable rate application, right? Understanding that, of course, not every field is uniform, not all soils are uniform, which in turn makes, of course, not all fields uniform from a fertility standpoint and management perspective. So this was actually the very first field that SoilOptix ran in 2013. And it still holds true to sort of the story and why we as a company, why we are here today really is our excitement around essentially stemming from this 2013 field. So you can look at, there was a 1 acre grid that was done on this field, which in essence, let's be honest, is fairly granular for grid sampling. All right. And then when you look at sort of the SoilOptix piece to the right, you can see that it's even further defined, right? There's more information that we can gather and really unlock, if you will, within this field. Really, the ranges are fairly similar, roughly from about a 5.2 to 7.6 pH, right? Across really that whole field. But if you really look in sort of the southern part of that field, the northern part of that field, that's where we're really starting to show that definition. And that's what sort of translates, let's say, into the variable rate application. You can go to the next slide, Ian. So when you look at sort of the 1 acre grid, this is the application that it sort of derived, right? About 104 tons of lime total on this field, ranging from about 0 pounds to the acre to about 8,000 pounds to the acre, which is fairly substantial, right? But kind of what keep in mind or keep an eye on sort of the 0 pounds to the acre size, about 63 acres roughly of this field needing no application. When you look on the optics side, we'll get to the 142 tons soon, but you could see that the application area for 0 pounds to the acre is the same, 63 acres. But what's different is we're also calling for about 38 more tons of lime on this field collectively. So what does that mean? So we're trying to essentially, or what we're doing is we're identifying and further intensifying, let's say, the boundaries to where these applications are really happening. We actually got about 8 acres worth, roughly about 10,000 pounds to the acre, right? So it's just further definition to really where even the most granular grid sampling is actually achieving. We can even take that a step further, right? So basically with the technology, what we're seeing is essentially every 11 feet, we're getting a data point. And at each one of those data point, we're dissecting into all these different layers. And here's just a simple example, one example of many that we've collected, I'm sure Steve's worked on, and others that are on the call that have maybe touched this technology and sort of understanding where there's various applications. You can go to the next slide, Ian, if you like. So in terms of that temporal piece, again, we can utilize that sensor data for 6, 8, 10 years, like I mentioned. So this is where sort of the effectiveness of this temporal information comes in, right? Understanding the change of what 1 year is after management, let's say, how does that look? And this is actually the same field, 2013 pH to what the pH is in 2018, right? So you could see a more balanced field. And that's really where I think this sort of technology really helps, is trying to address that balance, right? How do we balance out that field that Jared showed, right? How have we balanced out this field here? In the end, the agronomy doesn't change, right? That's the key thing here, is the agronomy and how you manage these crops does not change, but how you achieve that agronomy or how you achieve that information, that management can, and that's sort of where we're coming in. Ian, you can go to the next slide. So the one last thing I'm going to touch on here is more or less the carbon mapping piece. So this is very new to SoilOptix in the last year and a bit, is our soil health suite. So we are introducing essentially a carbon mapping technology, or utilizing essentially the sensor technology, the SoilOptix technology, bringing in the soil sampling component and lab testing methodologies with respect to carbon itself. And you can go to the next slide, Ian. So following the same methodology as, trying to capture fertility, texture, we're also capturing carbon now. And, there's a lot of untapped potential, I think, and a lot of questions that still need to be answered with respect to carbon. But, this is a space that we see still evolving, quickly evolving, and I'm no doubt 2022 will be even busier with respect to some of this adoption. So we've sort of answered that call here and providing essentially a suite of layers that can be stemmed from active carbon, organic carbon. One of the things is more or less checking with your lab of what they can provide with respect to the carbon deliverable. And then of course we can, work with those sort of labs and those sort of results to develop maybe a suite that works for your region as well. So I think that's all I got today, Steve. Did I miss anything that you wanted me to touch on?
I think it was good. I mean, generally it's about 1 per 8 acres or so in terms of the actual soil sample.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. 1 per 8. Yep.
And the minimum 3, and as you were saying earlier, about 8 inches or so in terms of depth, right?
Yeah.
The fascinating thing I thought about the picture that you had of the different soils associated with the different colors, right? And Ian and I were talking about this earlier as well, because he's out there driving, as am I often, is when you go take that sample based on what the variability is across the block, based on what you've seen from the SoilOptix scan, it's really just fascinating how easy it is to go in when you're taking the soil sample in kind of at one extreme, and then it highlights a section to go to where it's kind of the other extreme, and you're just hacking away at it, trying to fill that bag halfway up with soil, right? It's really fascinating how you can just hone right in on that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there'll be questions there, so kind of queue them up. I saw Mr. Jacoby had a question there as well, so we'll answer that here in a minute. It was about grapes and kind of granularity in rows. So where's Innovate Ag come in with all of this? Well, I mean, first, we are acting as a SoilOptix service provider, where we'll send somebody out in the field to go take those samples, or we'd love it actually if you took the samples, but take samples, drive it. But at the same time, it's really about data integration. It's pulling data together with other data, such as yield data, such as sensor data, and doing that in a way to make it easier for you to make decisions. And as Jared was originally inferring and kind of pointing to, he said, boy, these are the areas where I end up with higher density on blossom, and this is where I end up with higher density, or just really, it's Jared's happy place, right? We can, that's, if a grower just has 20 or 50 acres, you probably don't need us to kind of map out what that looks like at great length. But it's when the grower starts getting to 100 acres, couple hundred acres, thousands of acres, now it's really hard to kind of keep track of what's what and how all that's shifting, right? And so pulling that all together, now I'm going to share my screen here for a second, if I can do this right. And then we'll go back to Ian. And there we go. Basically take you into an app that we have partnered with on building out, introducing different layers. And so you can see here, this is actually for one of the Smart Orchard projects. If you're not familiar with the Smart Orchard projects that we're doing with the Washington Tree Fruit Research Commission and Washington State University, do take a peek at our website. It's basically, we work on putting a lot of different sensors and data sources all together to help a grower make decisions in strong collaboration with researchers. And so this is a view of this is about a 30-acre block or so of honeycrisp, and you're seeing different sensors, soil moisture sensors, and a key use case is using the SoilOptix granularity of mapping data to determine where you place your soil moisture sensors to make sure that truly is representative of you making decisions. As opposed to, well, I think we need to do it here, right? And then second is we can overlay in other sources of data. So this just happens to be from Ceres, who does fixed wing flyovers as a variation on a drone, except that they're doing it over by an airplane. And so we can bring that data in so that you can actually take a look at that as a layer. And then if we switch gears here, I just turn these guys off, and we can change to a soil-based view where we're taking the data from SoilOptix and landing it in here, and are working through kind of enabling it to do time series as well. So you can see now what it looks like with sand and what that variability looks like. Now this block, you can see there's a lot of variability, right? The yellows are just 17% or so sand down here, and then up in here, 82%. And if we take a look at even the, I have elevation in this one, yeah, we should be able to change to elevation, which we're mapping at the same time with SoilOptix and Green Atlas and the other sensors. And we can see that the higher elevation is up here. So this particular grower has kind of the worst of all worlds in terms of, all right, top of a hill, and you got sand up here, and then kind of more clay down here. So what happens? Well, when we look at the actual yield data, yields vigor, crop vigor it's challenging down here, right? And so there's some things that we're working with them together on this next year on, all right, where do we put double drip, triple drip, kind of change things up, where we better partner together on controlling things as they move around. I think the key to call out as well is Innovate Ag is a data company. We are not your fieldmen. It's about partnering with your fieldman, with whether that's a Wilbur Ellis or a GS Long or a Simplot or a Nutrient or whoever that may be. We want to use this data to, I mean, our tagline is empowering growers with data. So we want to help you take this data so that you can make your own decisions and put you on the same wavelength in collaboration with your trusted field partners and go to town on that. So, you know, again, we can change to organic matter here and see, again, a lot of variability in that block, right? From sub 1% to 2.5%. So a lot of different things going on, and it's all about looking at how that moves throughout or season to season. So, Ian, if you want to share back again as we get back to the PowerPoint. So a couple different use cases I want to share out. So one, we already talked about irrigation planning. One of the things we didn't have time to slip in there with Jared's presentation was, and one of the strengths with SoilOptix is mapping in the texture. And so at a glance, you can see where's the silt, where's the clay, where's the sand, what's that variability look like? And then again, overlay in, well, what's the actual crop stress look like? Bring that together. That's both for potentially planning your irrigation sets, what's your frequency look like, obviously in collaboration with environmental data and so on. But also if you're doing pre-plant, and we have quite a few growers this year that are mapping out their soil before they've even planted their crop, so that they can then make decisions as to, well, how do we think differently about our actual irrigation implementation up front, so that we have more flexibility, and where there are areas, for instance, where there is a lot more sand, great, so let's augment it so that we can apply more water more frequently there, or think differently about applying mulch again up front, so that you're not discovering this years down the road when you're struggling with yield in some areas. Let's go to the next slide. Another scenario ultimately is just soil and yield nutrient optimization. So again, it's at a glance. You see up in the top left-hand corner, this is that Smart Orchard block again, with Washington Fruits Grandview block. And at a glance, you can see just what we were looking at in that app earlier is sand is really high down in that top right corner. It's a little more mixed up toward the top. And then as you go over to the left, it kind of tapers off a little bit. But you can start to actually see, we're showing what the fruit size is and what that distribution is across the block, and helping understand where in some cases there are correlations or not, and then subsequently opening the discussion again with the grower and your trusted fieldman as to, well, what do we do about this? How do we think about this differently? And then critically, year over year, once you've got a couple of years worth of data, well, how does that variability change? So I'll toss it over to Caleb for a minute to talk about some analysis that he did on how some of these different nutrients change throughout the years. So Caleb, our data scientist, thanks for joining and speaking.
Thanks, Steve. So working with together with Bernadette Salata at WSU and Zach and his crew at SoilOptix, we basically were able to develop a pretty impressive timeline throughout a given year for this Smart Orchard block. And so basically, for a handful of dates, Bernadette and her team were able to collect several soil samples, I think for about 8 or 10 different days. And then with that data, we were able to, in addition, scan the block and together send all this data to Zach, where he was able to process it through their algorithms. And then we were able to produce these pretty nice timelines, time series, really, animations for all the variables that SoilOptix produces. So we have phosphorus here on the bottom left, and we're able to really see when, so August 4th, phosphorus was applied to the block, when it was really highlighted and emphasized in yellow. And then you can kind of see the phosphorus really begin to break down and work itself out of the soil as the hue of that plot really begins to darken. So just over time, you can really begin to see how long a nutrient stays within the soil, and then as it becomes mobile, it kind of moves out. So we're kind of just now identifying and performing some sort of analysis on understanding how does this time series affect crop yields. So it's a pretty exciting avenue that we're getting ready to begin our adventure on.
Awesome. Good. I think the theme, one of the real fun pieces of the journey here with Caleb is this isn't just about us coming out, doing the mapping, and then great, here's your report. It's about exploring the data relationships. Again, we see growers getting the most value where they're mapping it together with the yield mapping, the canopy mapping in terms of the density of the canopy, and really ending up with a view of what's my size distribution of the tree, of the fruit, of the count of the apples, cluster size. This time of year as you're thinking about pruning and seeing how that ties together and thinning and so on. So yeah, I think let's switch to the Q&A slide. There were a couple of different questions that had come across, and feel free, if you don't want to type, you can just raise your hand as well. And I'll read these out briefly, I guess. So one was welcome to James, who chimed in, that is dialed in from England. It's almost midnight, so James, I don't know if you're still there, but hey, thanks for joining us. Pete Jacoby with WSU had a question around how applicable the sensor is to row crops such as grapes, and we get this, and more specifically, wanting to know about the area underneath the trellis, right? Or in the case of apples, a grower wants to know, well, I don't really care about as much about what's in the row or in between the rows. I want to understand kind of down where the tree is and where the majority of the root system is. The answer to that is we take our soil samples in the actual row. We don't take them from where the row crop is. We take it from where the row is. And then the GPS mapping that we're using basically kind of maps it down into basically 10 square foot grids. And so, yes, ultimately, it's about mapping and showing you what's in the section where there is the row, and then we can you can literally walk. It's kind of the fun thing with the apps that we have that you can use on this. You can literally walk to the section and see specifically even what tree or vines are affected, where you've got that high degree of variability or lower pH or whatever. So it's a great question, and Pete, feel free to jump in with any more follow-up questions on that. We can ask. Zach, would you add anything else to that one?
No, I think it could be fairly ambidextrous, honestly, on that sort of piece. I know we have some in some of the wider type crops like almonds, maybe. We will see that sometimes even the sensor, they'll try to get it as close to the tree as possible, and then also make sure that their samples are pulled within that tree. Some will even just pull right in the middle, right? So it can be fairly ambidextrous in whichever way works best for the crop and the geography that you're working with and environment. So. Mm-hmm.
Got it. That's great. And Wade, I don't know if you'd have anything else that you'd want to add to that, but it largely kind of comes down to where we take the test effectively, right? The other piece in there that may not have popped in some of the views, maybe we go back. We're going to pop around just for a minute to help answer this, Ian, so I'll keep you on your toes. So if you want to go maybe to slide 3 or 4, where we're looking at some of Jared's views. What we do as well is, you can see, anywhere in here is fine. Actually go one or two slides later. There we go, organic matter. So, or pH, either way. You can see those numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 with those little dots. So those are specifically the locations where we take the sample. So the view that you're actually looking at here is really where we take the SoilOptix view and we enhance that with a few things, where you see this bar chart, you see the histogram distribution in the top, in the bottom left-hand corner. You see in the bottom right-hand corner, literally the sample ID numbers or sample location numbers. And then what are the numbers that we're getting from the lab for those specific locations? Call them your ground truth. And that's what many growers really want to know is, well, what, that's great that you say it's extrapolated to what, but what is it? Or what was the actual lab test? I will say, and then let's go back to where we were, Ian. Working with WSU and Bernardita Salato in the Smart Orchard, where they took samples in other locations throughout the block, the correlation they see is high. I've had this come back from other growers as well, in terms of, hey, I took a sample in one of those areas where you hadn't taken one to see how far off you were, and it is spot on. If you want to go to the very last slide, just to kind of keep you on your toes, to pop back, and this ties to another question, which was basically, what are all the different things that are measured? And so you can see here from SoilOptix, and do you want to add anything on this one, Zach?
No, I think everything's there pretty much.
Speaks for itself, yeah. Mm-hmm. Aluminum we don't always have. It depends on whether that's something that we order as part of the lab workup. We have had some interesting questions from growers. A couple of them had asked a couple of weeks ago, hey, can you do arsenic mapping? And I said, well, okay, if you want that, we potentially can do that. Certainly Northwest Ag, that's something that they can run on the soil samples that we provide to them. And we could partner with SoilOptix on figuring out how we actually can map out what that distribution looks like as an example. And then let's go back. Let's see if there's anything else on Q&A. That's basically it. Let's see. Oh no, I've missed the Q&A. So, Jared, how are you planning on raising your organic matter? That's a great question.
In all honesty, a couple of things that I wonder who asked the question, because I've been texting people over here. So humic acid is very, very good for organic matter. fairly pH neutral, at least in my workings with it. Yeah, I see you, Herman. And I want to increase my green organic. I want to increase my green manures, whether that's mow and blow, integrating legumes into the cover crop, multiple things. I'm not fond, and I'm not going to say this for every variety, I'm not fond of traditional composts in this particular block. One, it's honeycrisp, and our animal composts bring in salts, which I'm dealing with well water already. So I've already got a sodium problem, and it also increases my potassium, which is a negative for honeycrisp. Now, other varieties it wouldn't be. In this particular block, I'm going to use organic humic acid, and I'm going to try to improve our green manure program. That's what I'm looking at.
Awesome. Love it. And then you're not off the hook yet, Jared. So what accounted for the higher organic matter in your orchard block 70, M70 on the east side of the field down there in that corner?
Repeat the question, Steve.
So your organic matter higher levels on the east side of the block, anything that you can attribute to why that's higher there?
No idea. That orchard was broke out of sagebrush. We had not moved. There's been no dirt movement there. There's no ravines or anything that were filled in. That's just the way it is. I'm not sure why it is that way. It's just the way Mother Nature made it.
Interesting. Yeah, it's always, I mean, Zach, can you comment as a sidebar as to kind of any sort of surprises that you see? I mean, looking at different blocks. I mean, I'll think of another block that we did where organic matter was really high in an area, but you could literally tell it was kind of the size of or the shape of the feedlot that was there once upon a time, right? And Zach, you've probably seen some, like another one that we did just the other day is the grower had a ton of straw, I think, or hay that for whatever reason, that's right, it had burned down in a section. And so there's a bunch of, it was really pronounced where that organic matter was because of that. And it happened years and years and years ago, and they frankly forgotten about it. I don't know if you've got other any kind of fun little examples there, Zach.
Yeah, like and as it comes down to, and I'm glad that Ian's kind of pulling up the texture piece, because that plays a huge part in obviously a lot of the availability and from various nutrients as well, and obviously influences other pieces in pH and organic matters. So we've seen, you've already alluded to it, as historical management or any sort of history on those sort of fields that could drive, again, the difference in the makeup of that soil from a physical standpoint. So one of our fields that we've done, even just up the road here from our office, done 2018, I think. It was an old field that had half of it had been pasture and half of it had always been continuous tillage until it was taken over by another grower, and now it's all one. But you could see a straight line right down the middle where historically they were two very separate environments. So, and that's going to play a huge role into, especially if that field had consistently been blanket fertilized or any sort of management that was not actually based on the makeup of that soil or the true variation of that soil. That's just going to carry through even no matter what sort of management that you do put in there. So that's where we've seen a lot of that influence, if you will, from a history standpoint. There's a lot of interesting things. There's no doubt about it. I think we just had one here just the other day that came in that used to be a pivot and now is two separate fields. So again, you can see that a little bit in there with respect to, again, just various fertility properties on some of the management historically as well. But it all comes down to really the variation in the makeup of that soil, really. And again, that's coming back to the backbone of the technology, right? Is physical properties, physical structure of the soil, and figuring out that difference. So.
That makes sense. That's great. Okay. Yeah, if we get back to this, that's more or less brings us to the end. I'd say, another piece too is it's one thing just to provide you data in PDFs. We do work together to provide you with the data. We can provide it in shape files that can turn into prescription maps. Ultimately, again, working in collaboration with your fieldmen. We also output in CSVs and Excels. And then you saw a preview, or not a preview, but a snippet of us showing it in an app that runs on Android and iOS on a web. So again, it's all about making it available in ways that you can use. If you want to bring it to that kind of closing slide where we had just a recap on there. So continuing the conversation, next week, we're going to try something new. Last season we had ag tech meetups. I'm playing with the fire a little bit on this, but anybody that attended today, we will send an invite to an application called Clubhouse. Some of you are familiar with that. Some of you are saying, what the heck is Steve Mansell talking about? Clubhouse is kind of this, it's social media of sorts, but it's audio only. And as I was thinking about it more and more, and as I drive, spend a lot of windshield time, as many of you do as well, it's actually quite interesting in that you can kind of tune in. It's almost like talk radio, where you can tune in and then you can chime in if you want to along the way. So we're going to send out an invite for that, and we'll start a group around that, and we'll plan on doing that next Thursday at 3 or 4 o'clock. We'll kind of figure it out and send that out, and we'll see where it goes. You may say, hey, this is a pain. I'd rather kind of dial into a Zoom or to a Teams or whatever here and there, but I have a feeling there's so many other things in Clubhouse, whether it be crypto discussions or sustainability, or it's kind of nuts. Fashion, for all of you farmers that are big into fashion, this could be where you pick up the fashion tip. So it looks like there's actually quite a bit of interest. So go download the Clubhouse app. Just look for it on your iOS or Android store. Stay tuned for a link that we'll send either later today or first thing tomorrow. Click on it and we'll give it a go. And the nice thing is that it's more two-way, and it won't be as formal of a presentation at all. There will be no visual aids. It's just about kind of sharing perspectives and, hey, this is what I've tried and this is what works and so on. And that's kind of that. So with that, anything else that you guys would like to say in closing? I guess, Jared, anything from your side?
No, I think just looking at the map today, it dawned on me, I'm probably going to integrate, we do sap analysis on our honeycrisp during the growing season, petiole sap analysis. I think we'll focus on the 4 zones or the 4 appointed areas that you pulled the soil samples from. Mm-hmm. That one for sure. It's usually with sap analysis, pretty random. I think we need to stay on that.
Agreed. That's a great call out. Actually, I didn't realize you were doing that, so that's great to hear. We have another grower that's providing us with their sap analysis detail, historical, and it's early, but it's really fascinating looking at the relationship between soil and production and doing it in a systematic way. Right.
Soils are part of it. What the plant is uptaking is totally different sometimes.
Right.
So that's what I definitely working on that.
I love it.
Other than that, I think it's about it.
Awesome. Wade, anything from Northwest Ag? I'll take that as a no. And Zach?
Nothing here, Steve. No, appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for dialing in from Eastern time zone there, and dinner's calling, I'd say, or past at this point. This has been great, great interaction and feedback from all, and thanks so much. We will have another webinar in a couple of weeks. We're figuring out what that will be about. It's probably going to be more tied to yield, and we'll rotate it around. We'll do one on a smart orchard look back here in coming weeks as well, and really a lot of fun doing this together with you guys. And huge thanks to the speakers, Jared, Wade, Caleb. Did I miss somebody in there? Nope, I think I'm good. Ian, thanks for operating the show, and off to the races.